So today we're going to be talking about religion, and we're going to be diving into our own individual experiences with religion, as well as our thoughts on religion and how we kind of got to where we are today, which we consider more just, spirituality. It was kind of a requested episode in a way from one of our listeners. So if you guys do have ideas of things you want to hear us talk about, don't hesitate to message us and share, because we love just being very transparent on this podcast and sharing with you guys about what we've learned in life. We definitely don't know it all. We don't have it all figured out. But the little bit we do know, we're happy to share.
And I'm sure we'll resonate with some of you guys. So I'm really excited that we're going to be getting into this topic. And I know we're going to slightly get into our spiritual journey with leaving religion. So I'm excited to dive into that, because I think we'll get a little bit woo-woo in this episode. I don't really feel like we've gotten super woo-woo in the past episodes. It's just been more about like life lessons.
That's true.
And stuff. Yeah. So I'm excited for this one.
Yeah.
I feel like we'll be able to see that little witchy side now.
Yeah, which is so funny because we're pretty woo-woo. We'll get into it more in the next episode and how our views on spirituality specifically, but you're right. We haven't really talked about that, which is kind of surprising.
Yeah.
But you guys will get to hear it now.
Yeah. I'm super excited for this one because there's so much that I know we have to say. So, but yeah, I'm just really excited.
Me too. So, I don't know if you want to start by sharing your story. Like, did you grow up any certain way? Were there any like beliefs within your home when you were growing up around religion?
Yes. So I do know the majority of my family was actually Catholic. My immediate family, we never really had any religion when I was really little. I would say maybe up until about my earliest memory of having Christianity drilled in me was about 8 years old. Okay. But before that, my family was never the kind of family to go to church, read the Bible, pray the rosary. And I'm so thankful. But my earliest memory of having Christianity drilled in me was when I was about 8 years old. I was in the 3rd grade. We had a family friend, which was my grandma's best friend. And she was our babysitter. I don't know if you remember her, Soledad. Okay, yeah. So she was very super Christian. I don't know if you remember that. So she's the one that really brought Christianity into the home. And from a very young age, she always told me what I could and couldn't do in the eyes of God, and what I was allowed to like or not like in the eyes of God. And one of those was Pokemon. I was not allowed to like Pokemon, and I remember, I know, I used to cry so much as a kid because I loved Pokemon so much, and I was always told that it was from the devil. And I remember I had a really hard time with it because as a child, I'm like, it's a cartoon, like I really love it. I love like all of the Pokemons. I loved Misty so much. I loved Ash and Brock. And so I used to cry about it a lot. And really looking back, I think that caused some trauma growing up, because then I constantly would really try to think about everything that I liked and did, and if it was okay in the eyes of God. And then I remember also when 9/11 happened, she would play back the news, or whenever they were broadcasting the news and they would show the Twin Towers coming down, she'd be like, look, that was the devil that did that. You can see the devil's face in the smoke.
Oh my gosh.
And I would believe her. And as a child, I was so terrified, so I was conditioned in a way to think that whatever I did was never good enough, or anything that came from earth was from the devil. So that placed a lot of fear growing up. And
can I interject with a question?
Of course. Absolutely.
So I'm curious, because obviously your parents were not religious, right? But then here comes a caretaker who's very religious. So how, like, what I'm curious about is like the parent dynamic versus the caretaker dynamic, where now she's coming in and setting all these rules that your parents didn't have. So was it something where your parents were also like, oh, if that's what she says, that's what you have to do? Or did they have different views? Because it sounds like you were following what she was telling you.
I don't think my dad really knew the extent of what she would tell me and my brothers, but I think my mom did. But my mom trusted her a lot because she was my mom's best friend, my grandma's best friend, which is her mom's best friend. And I lost my grandma when I was 5.
Okay.
So
she was kind of that role a little bit.
Yeah, that's like really looking back and thinking about it.
Okay.
There's kind of like, she's an older lady. She's my grandma's age. My mom lost her mom, and now this is her best friend that's taking care of her kids and help kind of bring order to the home. Because my dad never was really the kind that would bring order to the house, as like we've talked about masculine and feminine. So it was really up to my mom with how we were raised, and then now having someone else that came in and kind of told us what was right and wrong, and that kind of signified like her mom, you know.
That makes sense. So I could see it almost like your mom, out of respect, it was like she was very respectful towards her.
Yeah, and so she eventually became really Christian because of her. And so then my mom started to follow her beliefs. And in middle school, my mom was super, super Christian. And then I started to get super, super Christian in middle school. But what's interesting, though, is that in the 5th grade, I don't know if you remember I told you, and this is what kind of like, where you're going to laugh right now, but I feel like we've both been very spiritual growing up. I don't know if you remember in the 5th grade, I told you I wanted to write a letter to God.
Probably. I feel like I do remember that.
And I wanted to tie it to a balloon.
Yes. So it could go up to him.
Yes, go up to the sky so he could get it and read it. So I was very much heavily influenced. But I genuinely like really did believe in, you know, the Christian God. And Christianity was just like super drilled into me, and I did genuinely feel like I had a connection with God. But to me, really interesting looking back, it was never a connection with Jesus, but it was more with God and source. Now, like thinking back right now, I can say it's source. But back then it was a Christian God. In middle school, I was heavily into Christianity, super Christian. I used to lock myself in my room, blast worship music, and cry all evening. And so I'm going to get into this, but hold on, let me gather my thoughts. I used to cry all evening as a teenager, and I used to constantly pray and cry out loud and say like, why me? I'm not good enough for you. Nothing that I do will ever be good enough. Why can't you just listen to me and listen to my prayers? Are you not there? Are you blah, 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 blah.
This like breaks my heart.
Yeah.
'Cause if you think about like a girl that young, feeling and thinking that way, when what's so sad is I think the seed that was planted initially was of fear for you. And so that's like the seed that continued being watered as you were developing that relationship. And that makes me so sad to think a girl that age would think and feel that way, you know?
Oh, yes. And this is a part of like the theory that I want to talk about later, because I do believe that religion and also Christianity can get you in a way where it's very fear-based and it's very black and white. And if you don't do what the Bible says, and if you sin, then you're going to go to hell and you're not going to go to heaven. So it's like very fear-based. And I honestly think that, and we'll get into this, but I honestly think that religion is man-made. And I think it was created in a way to control the people and keep people in fear. But we'll get into that. But and so when I was 13, I made the decision to get baptized in a Christian church. And I did. You know what's funny? I'm going to share this. So I did, right? And to me, I was like, this is like the most like most eventful, like most important part in my life. I'm going to go get baptized as a Christian. They're going to dunk me under the water. I come out of the bathtub and I slip on the stairs and fall on my ass.
Like the universe was like, no, bitch, this is not it.
And I was like, this really would happen to me right now.
Oh my gosh.
This really would happen to me. But
That's
yeah,
hilarious.
I'm like, it was definitely the universe telling me like, hey girl, like stop. But yeah, so all of my teenage years, I was very heavily into Christianity, but at the same time, I was also very drawn to the metaphysical. And I remember walking by like crystal shops, psychic stores where they read tarot, and always being very drawn to that, but knowing that it, like in my mind, I was like, oh, that's from the devil. I can't touch that, you know? So I never went into the stores, but I always kind of like wondered, like, why was I so drawn to that, you know? Mm-hmm. But anyway, so then when I started to figure out that I was into girls when I was a teenager, I remember feeling such like a deep disgust for myself and feeling like I'm in the wrong.
So you were still really Christian when that started to happen.
Oh, for sure.
So you had these like two worlds colliding.
Mm-hmm.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah. So when I realized that I liked girls and I wanted to date a girl, I struggled with myself internally so much because I was always drilled that being gay was a sin and it was from the devil and I'm going to go to hell. And I struggled so much, and I always felt like I wasn't good enough. I felt like I was a huge disappointment to God. I felt like I was a huge disappointment to my family, to the world in general, and I felt like I would never fit in because it was so frowned upon to be gay in you know, in the Christian world. And I was still Christian and still really believed in God, but I wasn't as heavily into it. I would say all the way up until I was probably about like, I want to say about like maybe like 25, 26. But even though I swayed away from it, I still listened to a lot of like Christian music, worship music, and there would be times that I would randomly start crying. And I remember my previous ex, because she was also super heavily into the church when she was in high school. And I remember one of the memories that I have was I was in my room and we were cleaning my room when I lived at home, and I was playing worship music and I just started crying. And then so she came up to me and I just sat on the floor and I was in tears, like bawling my eyes out. And I remember she hugged me and she was like, you want to get close to God again? And now looking back, I'm like, ugh. But I remember like her just telling me that, and I was like, why are you telling me this? But at the same time, like I was just so convinced that the reason why I was crying was because I wanted Jesus, or I wanted God, and I wanted to get close to God again. I don't know. But I didn't after that. But anyway.
Was there anything specific that started to push you away, like that happened, or do you feel like it was like just a slow progression of you moving away?
It was a slow progression of me moving away, but also what helped was I realized that being in a relationship with a girl didn't make me less of a human and less deserving of love or to be accepted by God.
Yeah.
Because I knew that I was coming from pure intentions because I genuinely loved my partner, and I just didn't view them as like lust, and it was like an addiction of the flesh, as they would tell me. They're like, oh, the only reason why you like girls, or the only reason why people are gay is because it's of the flesh and because it's all lust. It's never actual real love, they would tell me. It's all just lust. You'll never actually love the same sex. You're just horny and you're just lusting for this person, and it's never going to be love. So when I was in a relationship with women, I remember thinking like everything that they've told me is such bullshit because I genuinely love these people, you know, and I don't just see them and want to have sex with them. I'm not lusting for them. I genuinely love them. And I remember thinking like, if I'm going to be damned and taken to hell for really loving someone with all of my heart and that I have pure intentions towards, then that's not the God I want to follow. And that's when I really started to really sway away from Christianity. And then in 2018, I really founded spirituality, and when my official awakening happened, and having the freedom from finding spirituality and realizing that it's just brainwashing, you know, and it's meant to keep us in fear. And I personally feel that that religion is created in a way so that we don't know how powerful we are, which is crazy to me because like in the Bible it says we're created in the image of God. So that must mean that you're powerful.
Oh yeah.
But yet somehow they drill so much fear into us and tell us like you're never going to be like God, you're not like God, or you're not powerful, so you have to place all of your faith and all of your trust in God and just hope that he's going to answer your prayers. But yeah, that's basically like my story with Christianity. I was never really fully in the church as you were, so I'm really excited to get into your story. For me, it was just more of my own personal journey. It was never external. It was personal. It was a direct relationship with God, which now I think is Source. But that's basically my story, and then we can kind of get into my spiritual path after that and how that became freeing. But that's basically like a little summary of my Christianity sort of journey.
You know what's crazy is we've known each other for so long, but I still learn new things about you doing this podcast.
Yeah, I know, me too. Me too with you. Like, I think I know you, but actually there's so much that I don't know.
We were in each other's lives for a lot of this stuff, you know, but it's crazy to think like there's still so much of a private life that somebody leads that nobody else knows about, not even like your closest friends, you know. Yeah. So when you started to kind of like, you know, walk away from Christianity, did those feelings you had of I'm not good enough, like those emotions that would come up that would make you cry, did those go away, and did you start feeling like more sure of yourself?
Yeah, it's so crazy how freeing it was for me. Yeah. I felt like all of this weight lifted off of my shoulders and my back, and I suddenly felt worthy. I felt like I was powerful. I felt like I had purpose. I didn't feel like I was just in an ant farm and someone was watching me, waiting to see if I was going to make the right or wrong decision, to know if I was worthy of going to like heaven or hell. It was so freeing to me to know that all it really takes for me is to be someone that is full of love and light, good morals and values, be a good person, and just constantly be the better version of myself. And I knew that in doing that, I was going to be okay. And I also tell myself, like, okay, let's say the Christian God is real. I know that I'm a good person, and I know that I don't have any ill intentions, and I know that all of my morals and values are at the best that I can possibly get them, and all I have to worry about is loving, giving, serving, and being the best version of myself. Yeah. And it was so freeing. I can't even tell you how freeing. It's like you realize everything that you've been told was a lie. Everything was a lie. And suddenly I felt worthy and I felt good enough.
Yep. And all the non-Christians said amen. And you know what? That's actually why I asked that question, because I was curious if you felt freedom, because like, not to spoil the ending of my story, but that was my experience too. It was like, oh my gosh, that freedom in Christ that everyone talks about, that you never feel within religion. When you leave, I'm like, oh, this is the freedom in Christ people were talking about. Like, when I leave the church, I get to be free.
Yes. And it's so interesting because people will always tell you you'll find freedom in Christ. Just put all of your faith and trust in Christ. But somehow with doing that, it never felt like enough. And I see it day to day with people that are Christian and are heavily into church and religion. They constantly feel like they have to ask because they don't feel like they have enough. Because I think that they're just placing all of their worth and their value on this other being externally when it should be placed within. And oh my God, we could get into it, but we'll get into that a little bit later. Well, let's get into your story, because you have so much to share, and I'm just so excited for you to share, and I'm excited to listen. I know I've heard the story, but I'm sure you're going to share much more today. So,
okay. So I will try to give just a brief overview, because there's a lot I can say. I will give the briefest overview possible, and then I'll let you ask questions or interrupt me if you have questions on the way. So I did grow up within religion because my mom was a Christian. But I have memories going both to Christian churches and a little bit of like some Catholic churches too, just because part of my family was Catholic. And I remember going and never thinking much of it. It just seemed very normal. But I think when it started to feel not normal was like I was never allowed to celebrate Halloween because we were Christians.
Girl, same. Girl, same.
Like never in my life until I was an adult did I celebrate Halloween. And that is, like you were saying, it can be traumatizing as a kid, you know, when you have certain experiences. Because I remember going to school and being the only kid without a costume on Halloween, and everyone's like, how come you're not dressed up? You know, and I was so embarrassed that I would make up weird things. I remember I would pick out outfits that I could make up a costume at school.
It makes me so sad.
I mean, it's funny to me now, especially because I remember one, it was this dress with like stars on it. So what's ironic is I went to school and I was like, I'm a witch.
I love that.
But I was just like not lit. So for me, I'm like, oh man, I missed out, because Halloween actually looks like a lot of fun, you know? And it never did that. But then I personally got really into it. I think it started around middle school, but then got really heavy towards high school. And it was because my mom sent my brother and I to one of like the summer camps. And I guess that's just, I just like really got into it. And I do think part of it was me tuning into like my spiritual side, but it just really happened to be framed within the context of Christianity. So I got really heavily into it. Even like after high school, I started going to a Bible college, which I know I've shared that. Like I went to a Bible college. I worked at a church. So I literally saw like all the behind the scenes of church. And when I was working at a church, I remember I started to see a lot of things that just didn't sit right with me, because while I was on that path, I actually feel like I developed a relationship with Jesus. That's why I felt like I really connected with, and even like the Holy Spirit, you know, they talk about the Trinity. Like I really felt a connection, and I feel like I would hear from Jesus and I would hear from God, and that's what you were supposed to do, you know. But I remember the people around me didn't have those same experiences, which I thought was odd, because I'm like, that's what we're being taught, is that you're supposed to have a personal connection. And I remember when I started working at a church, I think because I had that personal connection with Jesus, like I started to see things that for me, I was like, this isn't Jesus, you know, because it's like, for example, I know you personally. So if I were to hang out with someone else and they start talking shit about you, I'd be like, that's not Natalie. Like I know her and she's not like that, you know? So that's kind of how it felt to me. So it kind of started with that. And at that time, that was when I was married. And my ex-husband and I actually both worked at the church. And there's so much shit I could expose about the things that we experienced.
Do it.
You're like, get into it. Like, so let me give you guys the overview, and then we'll see what we want to go back into. Like, I mean, I'll share one of the experiences. How about that? I'll give you guys a little something. So my ex-husband and I worked at this church, and you know how there's like this belief of like hierarchy within religion, right? You have like the pastor and the leaders, and it's like, and you got to like suffer your way up that ladder. Like we legit got paid so little that we could barely survive. Like I remember for us, like being able to splurge on for a date night for ourselves was like buying a $5 Little Caesars pizza. Like,
so sad.
And what's worse about it is it's not like it was a church that you're like, oh, well, you know, like they're not well to do. Like this is our reality, while the pastor had just bought himself a new Tesla. And this was when Teslas first came out. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe they were around like 6 figures or so. I'm looking at you because of Dan. Like, do you know?
When they first came out, I'm not sure. Now I do know that they're cheaper.
They're cheaper now.
Yeah.
But this was like the first Tesla, which I might be wrong. Don't quote me on this, but I believe they were close to 6 figures. So it was, and there were a lot of really wealthy people that attended this church and were very faithful with their tithing and, you know, all that. So I know that like the church had money.
I have things to say about that. So much to say about that.
So there were, you know, so there was, and that I just saw the way like just money, there's just so much I want to say, but it's just certain experiences like that. And to me, it just didn't, there was a lot that didn't sit right. So at that time, I actually remembered, I told my ex-husband, I was like, this doesn't align with me. I'm going to quit, which within that context was terrible because, you're supposed to be like equally yoked with your husband and like we're both working at this church. And I was like, I'm not working here. I don't want to attend this church anymore. I was just very not okay with it. So I quit first. He ended up quitting eventually. And I started going to a different church because for me, I was like, well, I still believe in Jesus. I just don't believe in what I see is happening. This isn't an episode where we want to get political at all. And this is not a reflection of my political views at this moment. But one of the other things that happened was that, because it was like a series of things that led to me leaving. So me experiencing working at a church, which, and at first was like my dream. I was like, oh my God, I got to be like in church all the time. And seeing how, not great it was. So at that time was when Trump was getting elected, or he was running for office, and the evangelical church like really started to back him up. And I remember at that time just feeling like, to me, he was not at all an example of Jesus. And I was very confused because I was like, the Jesus that I know is not a reflection of what I'm seeing the church support. Mm-hmm. So that was very conflicting for me. And then after that was when my divorce and that whole situation happened. So it was like that series of events that really just kind of pushed me out of the church. And, when I was going through my divorce, I was like pissed at God. So I like disconnected for a while because to me, I was like, I don't know, I was like blaming God at that time. I was like, why did you do this to me? Like, because in my mind, this like really played into my divorce. And I didn't share this when I shared my story, but I was like, I did everything right. Right. And not that I was perfect, but I was like, I did everything right. Mm-hmm. And my world still fell apart. Mm-hmm. So I was pissed. And so that pushed me away. But eventually I had to come back to my spirituality because I knew, I was like, I cannot deny the spiritual self that I am. Mm-hmm. And so I ended up going to like I remember I went to like a Buddhist church, and I don't even think it's a church. I just went to like the Buddhist gathering and like chanted with them. And it was just like my exploration, mm-hmm. But that gets more into my spiritual story. So I ended up coming back to my own spiritual self, but that's how that was like my experience.
Okay. I was like, well, you cut that off sooner than I expected.
I mean, there's a lot I can say. I just don't know how much you want me to say.
Yeah. So I think I would like for you to dive in a little bit more with what you saw behind the scenes, because I think that is so huge as to why you started to drift away from the church and from religion. Mm-hmm. I think you should share honestly what you saw, because being heavily into the church and working with the church behind scenes, you get to see stuff that other people don't get to see. Mm-hmm. So I think I would like for you to dive into that a little bit more.
I can do that.
Yes, please.
So one of the first things that came to mind was one of the things that really bothered me was how women are oppressed. And I think people of color specifically also are very oppressed within the church context, because I attended churches that, I actually went to one church that was like super conservative. That's the one I worked at. Mm-hmm. And then I also attended a church that was a little, but not, they were still conservative too, but you would consider a little more modern. And even within the one that was more modern, like, I still saw so much disparity between, like, for example, they would promote even within the Bible college, like women in leadership and blah, blah, blah. And for me, I've always been somebody who wants to like lead things and have influence and help people. Mm-hmm. And even though like I was taught that, when I would look at the, because all the pastors would sit together in one section, it was all white men. And this was also a church where the congregation was pretty diverse. But to me, like, the staff did not reflect that. And that was something that really bothered me, where I was like, if you say you support like women being in leadership, or, if you see that you have a diverse congregation, why does your staff not reflect that? And that I think was one of the big things that really started to bother me. One of the other things that I saw too was, obviously I was like personally affected with seeing how finances were managed within the church setting, but I would even see, because I was specifically in charge of like the children's ministry, but I would see like donations come in, but then be used for, and maybe it's like not my place to say, but I just would see them be given to people who, in my opinion, they would just act entitled. Because I think, to understand the context, like the church I was working at was in a very like well-to-do area of California. And I'm not saying there weren't people that would come in with need, but it's like their needs were like, oh, we can't afford camp because we're going to take our family to Disneyland next week, so we need to use the donation money to pay for camp so we can pay for Disneyland. You know what I mean?
I attended there was a moment where I was going to, I believe you were involved with the church, or you used to be involved with that church. And I know the people that you're talking about, because everyone there looked pretty well off. And I would go a few times just to, because I was like, oh, like I want to get back into Christianity. So I would go, and everyone there looked very well off. Nobody looked like they lacked anything.
Exactly. And I think that's the thing, is that for me is like huge disparity, right? And or even to see that within the staff of like, you would go to these pastors' homes, and they're living in really, really nice homes, driving really nice cars, yet within their own staff, the staff is struggling to, like, when it was my ex-husband and I, like, we were always struggling to make ends meet. Like, I remember going to try to buy a coffee and our card getting declined because we couldn't even buy a cup of coffee.
Oh my God.
So, and we're both working at the church, and that's the thing, is like, even though you're working there, you're still volunteering a lot of your time and getting paid like the bare minimum. And so,
did they ever give you an excuse as to why you were paid so little?
I think what it comes down to, and actually this is what I'll like expose next, is just this idea of this hierarchy of like, you have to, I don't know, there's this belief of like, you have to like suffer and put in like, I don't want to say the work, because you have to put in the work for things, but there's this idea of like, you have to like suffer your way to the top, essentially.
Which is insane to me. It's insane to me that you would have to suffer for God or for Jesus. Like, to me, that just doesn't sit right in my sense. Yeah.
And I think, and then one of the other things too is like, there's very much this hierarchy of like, the pastor is like, I feel like the way churches position leaders is like they are God. Yeah. They're put on such a pedestal.
And that's with any religion.
Yeah, with any religion, which is terrible. And so it's like, the pastor like is God, so what they say goes, and then everyone else is like ranked beneath them. And if you're expected as the congregation to submit to your pastor, and this is literally what we're taught in Bible college: submit to your husband. Especially if you're a woman, you're just submitting left and right. And so for me, this played out with the pastor at the church I was working at, and also with my ex-husband. So with the pastor, I remember when I wanted to quit, and I was
hoping you would share this. I was like, please share this.
I'm having to remember all these things now. So I remember when I wanted to quit, I remember praying about it, right? Because remember, at this point, I'm still like connected to Jesus. And so I remember praying about it, and I knew, I was like, that's the right thing. Like, you need to leave. And I felt peace about that. And I went to tell the pastor's wife. I didn't even tell him, because I technically worked for his wife, that I wanted to quit. And so then he had a conversation with me about how that was not God's plan for my life.
How does he know God's plan? First of all, that's what I want to know.
Exactly.
I'm sorry, did Jesus or God tell you, she's not allowed to leave? That's not her plan. Excuse me?
Yep, he like literally tells me that's not God's plan for your life. So basically didn't let me quit. So I spent another 2 months still working there, very conflicted, right? Because on the inside, I'm like, what do I do? Jesus told me to quit. my pastor says it's not God's plan for my life. I was taught that the Bible says I'm supposed to submit to my pastor, but I also have direct word from the OG. So like, who do I listen to? Like I was just so conflicted because there is so much guilt tripping within the church. So I felt so much guilt of like, well, if I don't listen to my pastor, like what's going to happen to me?
I think there's so much guilt in religion as a whole. I think that's how they're able to control people.
Yeah.
That's a whole ass theory that I have.
Yep. It is very much about control. And I think that when you start seeing that and how it subliminally is playing out within the pews, not to get poetic, but like you just start to see it and I don't know, it's just wrong. And so I spent another 2 months there. And then finally I was able to be bold enough to be like, nope, I'm leaving. Sorry. This is what's right for me. So there was that. And then one of the other big things was that when I was going through everything with my ex-husband, I remember that a lot of people within the church were telling me that I needed to forgive him, that I needed to stay with him, because I'm his wife. Like, I have to forgive what he did. I need to stay. They were basically, like, pressuring me to stay with him. And
did some of them know what you were going through?
They didn't know, like, the fullness of it, but I feel like some of them knew enough to understand, like, it was not a situation I should stay in, And so I think that was also really hard for me, where I was like, this is, I feel like there were so many times where I felt like I need to go, where I know what I need to do. I know what my right choice is. But then being, having other people in the church trying to influence my decision in a different direction. And that to me was like, that doesn't make sense. You're teaching me to connect with God. I am connecting with God. He's giving me guidance. And then you're giving me opposite guidance. So who am I supposed to listen to in this situation? And that was just very confusing. But I think luckily I was always strong enough to come back to myself and be like, trust yourself. If this is what you feel and this is what and you're connected to source, like you were saying, we're made in the image of God. I don't need a pastor telling me what to do, when I have that direct connection. So yeah, those are a few of the ones that come to mind.
Yeah, I'm trying to think if there's anything else that I want you to cover, but I think those were the basic ones that really stood out to me that I was hoping you would really get into.
I just was having to remember. I'm like, oh my gosh, what did I'm sure there's more, but those are just like, yeah, I don't know.
Yeah. So when you were struggling to leave, what did that look like for you? And how long did that really take? And did you feel like you had to sit with yourself before you found spirituality? Or what did that look like for you? Like the walking away process, what was that like for you? For anybody that's also trying to like leave the church or leave religion, that are very conflicted.
Yeah.
Do you have any advice that you can give them?
I mean, the first thing that comes to mind is like, trust yourself above anybody else. Because I think when I see the situations in my life that I've gotten myself into that were very sticky, it was always because I trusted somebody else more than me. And you should never do that, because you know what's best for you. If you believe in God or the universe or whoever, like, and you have that connection, then receive that guidance for yourself. There should never be somebody else telling you what God wants for you, especially if it opposes. Even when I do readings for people, like energy readings, I always let them know, like, hey, if something doesn't resonate with you, like, don't take it as like ultimate truth. I don't know better than you what's best for you. Like, only you know that. Nothing should ever come out of left field. Like, to me, that's a red flag. So I think trusting yourself is important, and also knowing who, like, if you can find people to have those conversations with that are more open, I think that's really helpful. Because I remember I did have one friend in the church, and then to this day she's like the only friend I've kept from church. She was the only one that looked at me and was like, you need to leave him. And she's someone who is more open, and being able, like, she was able to hold space for me, which was really nice to have somebody who could hold space for me as I was trying to figure out what was right for me. Because even though she was, really considered herself a Christian at that time, she wasn't like trying to push that onto me, So I think if you're able to, have someone to talk it through, maybe even like I talked through it a lot in therapy. That was like such a huge, because I had to deal with it. It was like all trauma that I was holding. Because like you probably don't realize it when you're in it, but there's so much trauma. Oh my gosh, I'm just thinking of more more stories.
Spill it. Spill it.
Oh my gosh. Okay. Oh. So churches have mean girls clubs.
Oh, I'm sure it's everything in life, but that's the last place you would think.
It's shocking. It is so shocking. Well, to me, because I'm like, hello, Jesus. This is what we're preaching.
That's one thing I learned. There's so many people that hide behind masks.
Oh my gosh. And especially in churches. Like, and you know what? That's one of the other things that encouraged me to leave was that I felt like the best people I knew were not Christians. And the worst people I knew were Christians.
Yes, thank you for saying that.
It's true, though.
Thank you so much. Yes, because I feel the exact same way. The most pure-hearted, kind, most giving, most open people that I know are those that are not Christian, are those that are not religious.
Yep.
And those people in my life that are supposedly followers of Christ and Jesus are the most judgmental, most mean, most closed-hearted people that I've ever met.
But how are you not supposed to be when you feel like you're constantly being judged, right? Because
Very true.
You're taught fear, you're taught what you were feeling of like, am I enough? Well, I'm not good enough. This is right, this is wrong. Like, of course you're going to judge everyone else because you feel like you're being judged all the freaking time.
Yeah.
Yeah. But this is the last story I'll share because we have other thoughts. Oh no, I shared this already. When I was dating the guy from church.
Oh yes, and then they
here's
him out of the group.
Yes, but here's another fun part of that story. So, okay, for context, like there was a guy I dated from the church and he was one of the leaders in the church. In the youth group, I didn't know that. So we got like shunned or whatever. So there was a group, and this is what's funny, is it wasn't even girls, it was like a group of women, like older women that were also leaders within the youth group who just, I don't know, they decided they didn't like me for some reason. And I'm a teenager going into this setting. And it might have started because of that dating situation with him. But I remember there was this lady that she, I think her son, well, I don't think, I know, her son liked me. And so she wanted me to be with her son. I had zero interest in her son. Her son was super quiet, didn't even talk to me. Like, I think he just secretly liked me from a distance. And so she would come up to me and she would be like, I had a vision of you with my son and that you were part of our family and that you guys were married, which I'm like manipulation. And I'm just a teenager. And you imagine having this adult woman saying these things to you. And I remember in my head being like, really? Because the guy doesn't never talk to me. Like, he doesn't say anything. Because in my mind, I'm like, if you like me, come tell me. You don't send your mom with a vision from God. You know what I mean? Like, so stupid. And this lady was just like set on, she wanted me with her son. And so when I started dating that guy, that other guy, like we actually had broken up and then I ended up getting back with him. I remember like I was about to walk into the youth service and she was one of the leaders and she grabs me and she's like, can I talk to you? And the other leaders are like watching this happen and nobody stopped her. Nobody told her this was wrong or not to do this. So I'm like, sure. So she literally takes me to the side instead of letting me go into the service and she starts like basically scolding me for getting back with this other guy, for not liking her son, for blah, 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 and how wrong it is of me to do that. And she's like going off on me. And other leaders are just sitting in the corner, just like watching this happen. And as a teenager, unfortunately at that time, I didn't know to stand up for myself. But now looking back, I'm like, I should have slapped that lady. And so I just like took it all, like let her go off on me. And then like eventually made it into the service. And But yeah, those mean ladies, and then because if one person doesn't like you because it's all a circle, and they're over here having their group, their Bible study on love and grace while hating on this teenage girl. And I'm just like not smart enough at that time in my life to speak up for myself.
And the fact that a grown woman would have the balls to speak to a teenager that hasn't had life experience, to speak to them like that.
Yep.
To try to manipulate you and gaslight you when you're so young, so naive. Oh my God. And I do want to share a small little story about mean people in church, because I remember there was this church and I really wanted to be a part of the choir, and I really wanted to sing. And I remember I told my mom, I'm like, I want to sing in church. And so she's like, okay. She's like, let's go talk to the lady, an older white lady. She looked like she was probably like maybe like in her 50s, 60s, and she played piano. And I remember we walked up to her and I told her I wanted to sing. The first thing she told me, she's like, well, are you a follower of Christ? Are you Christian?
Oh my God.
And she was like so rude about it. And I was just like, I just stood there not knowing like what to say or like what to think. But I remember just thinking, like, I just want to sing in the choir, like at church, And so I'm like, yes. And then so she's like, okay. She's like, well, sing this song. And I was just like, oh my God. But she was just so mean, so rude, so blunt. And it's like, you can, like, that, you are the reason why so many people get turned away from the church and from religion. Because of people like you, so many people are turned away. And you would think, if you're such followers of Christ and Jesus, why are you so mean?
Yeah. Why are you such an asshole?
Yeah. Like, I don't get it. It's like,
like
supposedly, yes. It's.
Yeah. It's not it.
Not it.
Not it.
Not it at all. So, question. So you asked me about when you finally found spirituality, how I felt, and if a lot of what I was feeling when I was Christian went away. So I want to ask you the same question back. What was that like for you when you found spirituality? Yeah, just share.
It was so freeing. Oh my gosh. Like I can't even describe how freeing it was, because I remember, and that's why I used that term earlier of like freedom in Christ, because I remember when I was in the church, I'd be like, oh, I just want to feel that freedom in Christ. I want to feel it. And I was always like wanting it. And I never ever felt that. And it wasn't until I left the church. Like it was, I think that was my initial feeling, was like you said, this burden lifted, and you're just like, oh my gosh, like and you always say how when I, first lived in Long Beach, that's when you saw me like my best energetically. That's because that's when I was feeling that. I was feeling that freedom of like, no one's judging me. There's no rules. There's no right or wrong. I get to listen to myself and trust myself and do what I believe is best for me. So I just felt, and I just remember thinking like, this is the freedom in Christ I've been looking for. And I still believe that's what it is. It's like when you allow yourself to connect outside of the context of religion, you really experience that true freedom that you seek. So, sigh of relief, literally, when you leave.
Yeah.
And I'm not going to say it, you don't feel guilty or it doesn't come back around, because I did, later on I had to come back around in therapy and talk through all the stuff, all the stories I just shared. They were very traumatic for me at a certain point, and I had to talk through a lot of that stuff. And a lot of the guilt that comes with that. But, like, still you're free.
Yeah. When I found spirituality and I remember when I started getting into tarot cards and energy work, for the most part, I was okay, but there were some triggers that would come up because in the back of my mind, I kept playing the narrative of this is from the devil. Even though you have left the church and you've left religion, you've left Christianity, and you've done the work to get out and you do feel free, there's still some stuff in the back of your mind in the beginning of like your spiritual journey that will come up that you have to work through. Yeah. Now I'm completely fine, but I would say for maybe about like like the first year into my spiritual journey, there were some little triggers that would come in the back of my mind and little voices that, to me, I just remember hearing like my mom and hearing my babysitter and hearing anybody that was into Christianity tell me like, oh, you can't dabble into crystals because it's from the devil. You can't dabble into tarot cards because it's from the devil. You can't like astrology because it's from the devil, which I have this whole conspiracy about astrology and religion. But
let's hear it.
You want to hear it?
Yeah.
Okay.
Let's hear it.
Okay. Oh my God, we're at 53 minutes. Okay, so let me say this really quick. So in church and in religion, they tell you that astrology is of the devil and that you should not be using astrology because you should not be able to map out your future, because the only one that knows your life is God and Jesus, and you should just trust, you know, God or Jesus. Well, to me, I just think it's funny how there's so much correlation between astrology and the Bible. There is so much correlation between when supposedly Jesus was born and then also when Jesus was resurrected around obviously Easter, and there's also correlation between the Virgin Mary being Virgo, which is her season, and Virgo is a nurturer, the one that, you know, pretty much provides life, and that the 12 disciples are the 12 zodiac signs, and each one signifies a zodiac. A zodiac, and they also used the stars to find Jesus when he was born. So they used astrology.
That gives me chills.
Yeah, and it all they do talk about it in the Bible, from what I've learned.
Yeah.
But for some reason, they say we shouldn't dabble into astrology because it's of the devil.
Because it empowers you to not need a freaking pastor telling you what to do.
Thank you. Yes, exactly. So like I said, I personally think that religion was man-made. I do believe that there is source. I do believe that there is a higher being, and I don't see the higher being as like a human the way the Christian people view like God or religion. Like, I don't know what it is about humans, but I think that the universe is so big that we can't possibly wrap our mind around someone being all-knowing and the creator if it's not human. So we have to make like these images and these characters that of what we know because our mind cannot grasp that.
Yep.
So I personally do believe, and there are conspiracy theories about this, that religion is man-made. And I think it's there to control people and to keep people in fear. And I personally believe the reason why they don't want us to use astrology is because we would be so powerful. We would be able to know how to work with the rhythm and the energy of the earth, the moon, the stars, the cosmos for our greater good. Yep. You know, if we wanted to start a business, we would know exactly what day to do it and at what time, because that is when the energy of the cosmos aligns perfectly with our energy and with what we're trying to start and the energy of the earth. So that's like my little own like little theory. That. And there's so much power behind astrology, and I wish more people used it because you can really use it to your benefit. But I really think that so much is hidden, and there's so much subliminal messaging in the Bible, but they do it in a way to control people because we are made in the image of God. We are all powerful. And you know, in the context of like church and religion, our goal is to be as close to Jesus as possible, or be at like, you have to be like a replica of like what Jesus is, right? Well, even in spirituality, like our goal is to be as close to source as powerful, right? As possible.
Yeah.
And to me, that is using whatever the universe, whatever source, whatever earth gave us to use in our power, so that our souls can elevate and create the reality that we want and we need, and just to be free. Yep. And yeah, I personally believe that.
I love that. Oof, it gave me chills. Yeah. I love that so much because I think it makes sense. And the way these are all just tools that are there to help us to understand the universe, like consciousness. Like, these are tools. Why do we want to limit the universe and restrict it. Like, if you think about it, it is so prideful, and it is from such a place of ego to be like, I know the answers, I know the way, I have the right religion, you have the wrong one. And ego and restrictiveness and pride is not who God is.
Yeah. There are so many religions. Who are we to say that our religion is the right one and that another country's religion is not right? Who are we to say?
And like why and how?
Yeah, exactly. We're no one to say your religion is wrong, my religion is right. We have no idea. I think at the base of it, honestly, I think that at the base of it, we're all worshiping or trying to meet the specific goal, and it's all the same at the end of the day. Like, if you peel back the curtain, I personally believe that it's all the same.
So my theory on religion is that it is just every culture's representation, not representation, but interpretation of source and spirituality.
Yes, thank you.
That's what I think it is.
And it very much is that. I do think that at the end of the day, it's all the same, but you were taught differently depending where you were born and how you were raised and what your culture is. In every single religion, there are different. And then don't like quote me on this either, but like in Christianity or Catholicism, there's Jesus, and then we have Buddha, and then we have other prophets within different religions. Personally, the way I like to view them, I do think that they're actual ascended people that came down to earth, that their souls have just ascended, they're higher beings. But they've come back to earth to teach humanity. So I do believe in every single one of them, but I don't think of it as like what Christians or Catholics say that they are. But I do think that they are ascended beings that came down to earth to teach us what it's like to be like source, or to be ascended souls, people with higher consciousness that live in different dimensions. But
I agree. You know what thought I had recently? I was like, but why? Like, have we had that happen again? Like after Jesus? I don't feel like we have, and I wonder why. You know.
But I see. Yeah.
Unless we do now, and it's there's just so many like influencers now that maybe there are just like, I could see there maybe being a lot of them, you know, that are making like an impact and through spirituality and different things like that. But I don't know.
That's a really good question. But then also when I think, okay, so you know how we have children that are just born that are so smart? I then question, why are they so smart? Are they ascended beings?
I think
that have come down to earth and have learned and that have learned, and they're just geniuses.
You know? But you know what, the more like one of the other thoughts I've been having a lot recently is how important it is that like how we raise kids, because they really do elevate the consciousness of the earth, you know. So imagine like a kid, like you're the one you're saying, coming into this lifetime into a family that's not conscious. I think that it doesn't create the best dynamic or environment for them to really become everything that they can be. So I feel like even more so now I'm feeling that responsibility of like with parenting, you know, because I do think we have people coming into this world that are doing that work still, that are ascended beings. So I think we need to treat kids differently.
Yeah, and there is a rise in spirituality right now, and I do think the reason why we're seeing so much chaos in the world and so much destruction within church as well is because so many people are waking up. We're waking up as a collective and wanting to raise the vibration and the frequency of earth, and just to awaken the consciousness of humanity and the whole entire universe. But there's so much that we can talk about. Do we want to keep going? We are at an hour and 3 minutes.
I think we should close it, because I know next week we're going to talk about spirituality. So I feel like we'll get to share a lot of our thoughts then too.
So we're going to go ahead and wrap up the episode here. We're already at an hour in, and our camera is about to die, so we're going to close this now. But do you have anything else you want to say?
Only that if you feel like you're battling within yourself what's the right thing to do, trust yourself. Trust your intuition.
Your intuition never lies.
Yep. Like, then don't let anybody shame you. Like, God's not shaming you for following your truth and your path. God is always on your side.
Mm-hmm. And as long as you're doing good,
you're being a good human.
That's all that matters.
Yep.
You're not going to go to a physical heaven and a physical hell.
I feel like we need another episode on like the afterlife.
Yes. Oof, most definitely.
Let us know if you guys want to hear about that.
Okay, guys. Well, thank you so much for joining us today. We hope you enjoyed today's episode.
We'll see you in the next one.
Bye.